So I talk about the death economy, which is what that has created, and I was part of creating that. We've created an economic system that is marching us we're consuming and polluting ourselves towards self-destruction, based on this perception of maximization of short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. What if we turned that around and said, let's have our goal be to make short-term profits for business, because you got to make some profits, but you don't have to maximize them. Put a bunch of that money and put a bunch of the efforts and energy into creating a life economy, an economic system that pays people to clean up pollution, to corral all the plastic that's floating around in the oceans and recycle it, to regenerate destroyed environments, to create technologies, solar and wind. We're on the way to doing that. We are in the process of creating a life economy. But let's pay people to do things that make life better, to make life for all living creatures, and for my 16-year-old grandson and all of his brothers and sisters around the world. There's no reason why we can't have a really good lifestyles, but by paying ourselves to do things that are not based on short-term maximization and destruction, the death economy. I like that instead of the term construction, often a lot of what we call construction these days is actually destruction. So I think we can come up with an economic system that gives us both, that allows us to use these technologies in support of all life and in support of future. And we can have growth. It's just that we can't have growth in the areas where we've been looking at it, this extreme materialistic tearing up of the earth. We don't need to go out and mine for copper. There's a lot of copper around that's just not being used. Think of all the pennies.
What about cobalt? What about lithium? We need these iPhones, don't we?
Yeah.
We need our Tesla cars that drive on batteries and that have these big fancy screens in them.
Yeah.
That's a lot of slave labor, a lot of mining of lithium.
It doesn't have to be slave labor. Yes, we might have to pay more, but we'd also be paying people more to do these tasks. And so, Henry Ford said, I want to pay everybody in my factories enough money so they can buy a Ford car. Well, what if we paid those miners in the Congo and elsewhere who are mining lithium? What if we paid them enough so they could buy cell phones and electric cars and convert?
Then no one would be able to afford an iPhone.
Well, I think, if we look at human history, we've been around as...
And I would be willing to pay more for an iPhone if it would get rid of that shit.
Yeah, so would I.
But
I think a lot of people would, I think.
Yeah.
But it's a matter of redefining what it means to be successful. For most of human history, 200,000 years or so, that we've defined ourselves as Homo sapiens sapiens, wise humans, which is kind of a laugh because who else is destroying a lot? But my cats aren't destroying the world around them. They may be, wreaking havoc on my house. But for about those 200,000, most of those 200,000 years, we've lived in a life economy, an economic system that regenerates itself. And the indigenous people I work with, it's all about the long term. They're not just looking at the short term. And it's only been within the last blink of an eye of history, maybe 2,000 years, but a short term in the history of humans, that we've been on this trajectory of creating a system that ultimately seems to be headed towards self-destruction. And I would just add that when I was in business school back in the late 60s, I was taught that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for investors, but also pays his employees well, gives them health care insurance, pension funds, and invests in the communities where his factories are built by putting money into recreational facilities, or libraries, or educational facilities. In other words, is a good citizen, not maximizing profits, making enough profits, a decent rate of return. And then in 1976, Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize in economics. And Friedman had the ear of the world. And he said, no, the only responsibility of business is to maximize short-term profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. That was a fairly new concept. It had been growing, But he really had to take off. Thatcher loved him, and Reagan loved him, and he traveled around the world promoting this concept of maximization of profits. And Jack Welch comes along at GE, and other people became these icons of cutting costs, cutting people's salaries, firing people to make the bottom line, to make profits bigger and bigger and bigger, put it in the hands of a few wealthy investors who are already wealthy and make them more wealthy. Mm-hmm. That's the course we've been taking, and it's taking us into this death economy. We have an opportunity now to turn that around, to redefine what it means to be successful humans, to create a life economy. I have to say, Danny, I'm excited to still be alive at this time when we're moving in this direction. I think everybody listening to this program should feel blessed that you live at this time, that we're here now, that we have this opportunity. We are understanding that we're on a trajectory that's dangerous, very dangerous, whether we're talking about what's going on with the potential wars and nuclear explosions, climate change. It all comes back to an economic system that we can call a death economy. These other things are symptoms. They're not the problem. They are problems, but they're not the problem. The problem comes back to human greed that's defined in this idea of a death economy. But human greed is not inherent in human beings. I don't see it in indigenous cultures. I don't think we had it for most of our 200,000 years. People took care of each other. It was important to be part of the community. You know, Native North Americans had this thing called the potlatch, you know, and part of it was giving away what you had. It wasn't trying to take more from people. It was giving away. You know, and the people I work with in the Amazon, if you're a good canoe builder, you build canoes and you give me a canoe in exchange. I'm a good hunter, so I bring back some good meat for you on a weekly basis or whatever. There's this exchange, but it's recognized that if anybody is suffering needlessly, I mean, people may suffer because they broke a leg or whatever, but if anybody is suffering needlessly for want of something, the whole community suffers and you take care of it. Mm-hmm. I think that's human nature. And I think we've moved away from it by a philosophy, a mindset, perception. We get back to touching the jaguar. Let's touch that jaguar and turn the perception around of what it means to be successful humans, be successful human beings, being human. Let's be human.
I get what you're saying. I agree with you. But due to the trajectory that we're currently on right now in this world, in this nation, do you really see that as a possibility?
I do.
How so? How would it be implemented?
I wouldn't be sitting here with you if I didn't believe that. I wouldn't be writing books. Mm-hmm. I'd be out, whining and dining and bringing myself silly. I don't know. No, I do. I think we're moving in that direction.
Really?
Yes. I mean,
how so?
Solar, wind.
Solar and wind
have moved us away from fossil fuels. They're at their infancy. But 20 years ago, everybody said solar will never be economically feasible. It is. But that's just one example. What I hear, and I've had the opportunity to travel around the world speaking because of these books that have gotten to be so popular, and more recently doing a lot of it by Zoom. And everywhere I go, I see that people are really waking up to the fact that we have to change. And that's the first stage. They're not actually changing. Remember, perception. Our perception is changing. The next step is to implement actions that honor the new perception, and then that changes reality. We haven't really got to taking the actions in a very strong way yet. And as you mentioned earlier, we're being distracted terribly by the war in Israel, or in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, and so many distractions. The political outrage that's hitting this country right now is, a big distraction.
Yeah.
And there's so many distractions, but people still around the world are getting that we need to change. I mean, yes, I do think there's hope. I would hate to put a probability on it because I also think there's a pretty high probability that we won't go that direction. And if we don't make the changes that we need to make, we're headed toward more and more catastrophe. I truly believe. So there's these two paths. In fact, the Algonquin-speaking people where I come from in New Hampshire, a long time ago said human beings at some point in history are going to be offered the opportunity to take two paths. One path will lead to their destruction as human beings. The other will lead to a much more glorious world. I think we're at that crossroads right now. That's my belief, and I'm sticking to it. And it
Yeah.
may not be true, but it gives me the hope that we can take the right path,
Mm-hmm.
and I see people around the world wanting to do that.